The desert did not whisper that day. It screamed. Wind carried grit that cut into skin like knives, and the sun showed no mercy as it blistered the earth below. Out there, where even the vultures circled wide before daring to descend, a woman lay tied to a splintered wagon wheel. Her wrists were raw from the rope, her lips cracked open by thirst, her breath so shallow it almost disappeared in the heat haze. The men who left her there hadn't bothered with words. They spat in the dirt, muttered about debts unpaid, and walked away with spurs jingling. The wheel creaked in the shifting sand, and each sound was a reminder. She was no longer considered worth the bullets it would have taken to end her clean. Hours dragged into something longer, a limbo between living and dying. Flies gathered at the corners of her eyes. The smell of leather, sweat, and dried blood still clung to the rope. She tried once, only once, to pull herself free, and the effort cost her nearly all she had left. The desert floor burned her cheek, and she tasted iron when her tongue found the cracks in her mouth. Somewhere a hawk cried overhead, and she thought of freedom, what it looked like, how it once felt. She almost laughed, but the sound came out as a rasp. No one would come. Not out here. But fate has a way of testing its pawns. A faint rhythm broke through the hot stillness. Hoofbeats, distant, steady, carrying the weight of someone who rode not for pleasure, but because life demanded it. She couldn't lift her head, but she knew the sound, and she knew enough of this land to understand. Men on horses either saved you or ended you, rarely in between. The hoofbeats drew closer, dust rising in their wake. A shadow fell over her, blocking the sun just enough that her eyes fluttered open. What she saw wasn't an angel. It wasn't even a savior, just a man. Wide-brimmed hat tilted low, shirt stained with sweat and years of labor, rifle slung across his saddle. He studied her the way a rancher studies a broken fence, something that needed mending but might not be worth the trouble. She tried to speak, the words scraped out like rusted metal. "You'll regret saving me." The man dismounted, slow, boots crunching in the dust. He didn't answer. Not yet. His eyes narrowed, not in cruelty, but calculation, as though weighing the truth of her warning against the silence of the desert around them. The hawk screamed again overhead, and the question hung in the air. Would he walk away like the others, or take the risk that could cost him everything? The ranch sat low against the horizon, a scatter of weathered boards and stubborn fences clinging to land the desert kept trying to take back. It was a place for one man's hands alone. No hired help, no laughter, no echoes of children chasing through the dust. Just the creak of a windmill and the scrape of shovel against hard ground. Samuel Hart, though most in town only called him that rancher, had built this solitude after war carved holes in him that never closed. He'd worn the Union blue, seen men's faces turn pale in seconds, and carried home the sound of cannons lodged deep in his skull. Folks said he had a wife once. Some said she left, others said she died. He never corrected the talk. He just kept riding the miles between his cattle, patching fences and mending harnesses. At dawn, he moved like a man wound by habit. Coffee boiled black, a piece of bread chewed slow, saddle cinched tight. By noon, sweat carved rivers through the dust on his face. At dusk, he lit a lantern, stared at the doorframe across the table, and spoke to no one. Nights were quiet, but heavy, the kind of quiet that settled deep into bones. The day he found, her should have been like all the rest. A ride out to check the southern pasture, a survey of parched land and sagging wire. But the desert had other plans. He hadn't meant to stop when he saw her bound to that wheel. He could have circled wide, claimed he never noticed, gone back to his silence. Yet something in her eyes, dry, fierce even in weakness, dragged him down from the saddle. He remembered his own men, left on fields with no one to cut them free. He remembered promises made to ghosts. When he brought her back, He did it without words. He set her on his horse, steadied her against the horn, and guided them both home slow. Inside the ranch house, he laid her down on a cot he hadn't touched in years. He poured water careful, a trickle against her lips. He cut away the rope and rubbed her wrists with oil until the skin stopped bleeding. All the while, she watched him. Her eyes weren't pleading. They judged, measured, as if daring him to regret what he was doing. When she finally drifted into sleep, Samuel sat back in his chair and stared at the dying fire. The desert had given him cattle to tend, fences to mend, demons to fight. It had never given him a stranger with a warning rasped from cracked lips. And yet here she was. She woke in the dim light of morning, the thin curtain trembling with the push of desert wind. Samuel was already at the stove, black coffee steaming in his cup. He didn't look her way, didn't speak, but the scrape of his chair when he rose told her he'd noticed every breath she took. Her throat burned, but water waited on the table. She lifted the tin cup with shaking hands, drank slow and set it down without spilling a drop. That, Samuel noticed. Most half-dead souls gulped. Till they choked. Not her. Control sat in her bones. He brought bread hard but filling and left it there. She ate in silence, steady bites, eyes never leaving him. When she finished, she touched the rope burns at her wrists, then lifted her gaze. Her voice was little more than gravel. Should have left me. Samuel's face gave nothing back. He simply collected the plate, rinsed it in the basin, and went out to tend the horses. She remained on the cot, eyes tracing the rafters, ears tuned to the rhythm of work outside, the clink of a bit, the thud of boots on dry ground. When he returned, sweat beading at his temple, she was sitting upright, posture straight as if bound ropes still held her. Days passed like this. Samuel spoke only when needed. Eat or rest. She answered rarely, sometimes with a word, sometimes with silence. But her silence carried weight, as if behind it lay storms unspoken. One evening, as he sharpened a blade on the porch, she stepped out barefoot, hair tangled by wind. The desert painted her in red light. She didn't ask for a seat, she simply lowered herself onto the step. Together they watched the sun sink behind the ridges, cattle shadows stretching long. That was when she spoke again, her voice almost lost in the cicada's hum. "They'll come! Men don't leave things unfinished." Samuel's hand paused on the whetstone. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. The way her fingers flexed as if remembering rope told him enough. She turned her. Face then, sharp cheekbones catching the last light. "You'll regret saving me." Her warning hung between them like smoke. But Samuel only set the knife aside, slow and deliberate. His eyes, dark from years of shadow, met hers. No answer, no argument, just a silence that said he'd already made his choice. She looked away first, but in the stillness of that night, as coyotes howled beyond the fence line, something unspoken settled into place. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She was simply there. And for Samuel Hart, a man who had lived too long with empty spaces, that was enough, for now. Time on the ranch moved different. Days stretched long, not with excitement, but with the rhythm of tasks that needed doing whether a man wanted them or not. Fix the fence, check the herd, haul water before the sun climbed too high. Samuel worked, as he always had, but now there were two shadows moving about the land instead of one. She never offered a name, not at first. Samuel never asked. He simply noticed the way she carried herself, quiet, measured, as though every movement was chosen instead of given. She swept the dust from the porch without being told. She patched the sleeve of one of his worn shirts with a needle she found tucked in a drawer. When supper was set before her, she ate slow, careful, and left not a crumb behind. The silence between them grew heavy some days, lighter others. A sort of language built without words. When he pushed the water bucket closer, she dipped it, without question. When she brushed straw in the barn, he left her to it, trusting the work was done right. They never said so, but both knew. Trust was forming like a fence post, driven deep, steadying itself against the wind. One evening, Samuel found her kneeling in the dirt by the corral. She pressed a broken board back into place, hammer clumsy, in her hand but determination steady. He leaned on the rail, watching her swing until the nail bent sideways. Quietly, he took the hammer, straightened the nail, and drove it true. Their eyes met only a second, but in that second the silence wasn't emptiness. It was understanding. Later, in the hush of night, Samuel heard it. His name whispered faintly through the walls, just once. Samuel, as though testing if it still had meaning, if a name could bind two people closer than rope. He didn't answer. He just sat at the edge of his bed, staring into the dark, the sound of her voice haunting him more than the war ever had. By morning, nothing had changed. She moved about with the same deliberate steps, her warning still hanging unspoken in the air. Yet the ranch itself seemed different, less hollow, more alive. The porch no longer creaked alone. The lantern burned for two. And when the wind carried dust across the plains, it found not one figure standing against it, but two. Neither spoke of it. They didn't need to. In the Wild West, words were cheap. Silence was gold. The first sign of trouble came as a dust cloud on the horizon. Not the drifting kind the wind makes, but the kind driven hard by hooves. Samuel was at the fence line, wire stretched tight in his calloused grip, when he saw them. 3 riders, broad hats low, rifles slung careless across their saddles. Men who rode like they owned whatever their shadows touched. She saw them too. From the porch, her hand froze on the washboard, water dripping silent back into the basin. Her eyes narrowed. No fear, only a hard knowing. These were the men who left her to die. She didn't need to say it. Samuel read it plain in the set of her jaw. The riders drew up at the gate, horses stamping dust into the dry air. The lead, one spat, lips curling around a grin that had nothing kind in it. "Well, hell," he drawled. "Looks like someone's picked up our stray." Samuel stayed by the fence, shoulders squared, voice even. "Ain't yours?" The man chuckled, glancing at the others. "Everything out here's got an owner, rancher. Stock, land, women. She owes us, and debt don't vanish 'cause you got soft eyes." Her voice cut the air then, sharp as a whip. "I warned you," she said, stepping down from the porch. Rope burns still showed on her wrists, but her spine was straight, her gaze steady. "You should have let me rot." Samuel's hand rested on the fence post, calm, steady, but his words carried weight. "She ain't property." The laughter died quick. The lead rider's grin twisted into something mean. "You think you can stand between us and what's ours?" Samuel didn't flinch. His eyes, dark from years of war and solitude, met theirs without wavering. "I don't think. I know." For a long moment, silence stretched. Only the horses shifted, leather creaking under their weight. The men sized him up, weighing one quiet rancher against 3 guns and the wide-open desert. But something in his stance, something carved from war and years of fighting battles no one else saw, made them hesitate. Then her voice rose again, stronger now. "Try to take me. See how far you get." The words hung like iron. She wasn't begging. She wasn't broken. She was daring them. The riders exchanged looks, muttered curses, and pulled their reins. One spat in the dirt, but none of them stepped forward. They turned, hooves pounding away, dust swallowing them whole. Samuel stood until the horizon swallowed the last of them. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. She stayed by the porch, shoulders rigid, eyes still locked, on where the riders had vanished. Then, slow, she looked back at him. For the first time since he'd found her, the silence between them didn't carry warning. It carried trust. If their courage and heart touched something quiet and true inside your soul, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Out here in the Wild West, love may be hard won, but it's always worth the fight. Join us for more stories of grit, sacrifice, and hearts that endure against all odds.